Worldcomedue. Elite Children's Classics.
Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Down the rabbit hole. On a warm summer's day, a pretty little girl named Alice was sitting in a meadow with her older sister, Mary, who was reading from a book that had no pictures. The words in the book were too long for Alice to understand, so she decided to make a daisy chain. The sun was hot, and Alice's eyes were becoming heavy. Just as she was about to fall asleep, a big white rabbit ran across the meadow. He stopped for a moment, and then he took a large gold watch from the pocket of his little jacket.
"I'm late! I'm late! I'm late for a very important date!"
he cried. Then he ran off again. Alice jumped up and followed the rabbit as he disappeared down a big hole. Alice fell into the hole too, but she found herself floating slowly and gently down, down, down.
How curious,
she thought, and then bump! She landed on a pile of leaves, and to her surprise, she wasn't hurt at all. When she saw the rabbit in the distance, she hurried after him again. But alas! He disappeared, and Alice was left in a long hall with many doors. After finding all the doors locked, she suddenly spied a tiny door near the floor. It was locked too, but by putting her eye to the keyhole, she could see a most beautiful garden. Oh, if only she could go in! A little glass table stood in the middle of the room, and it had two things on it. One was a tiny golden key, and the other was a bottle with a tag that read, "Drink me." After examining the bottle carefully to make sure it wasn't marked poison, she took a drink. It was delicious, but suddenly she realized she was closing up like a telescope. She shrank smaller and smaller until finally she was just the right size to go through the little door. Oh no! She had forgotten to take the key off the table. She could see it clearly through the glass top, and she tried to climb up the table leg, but it was too slippery. When she had tired herself out, she sat down and cried. Soon she saw a little glass box lying under the table. In it, she found a very small cake decorated with the words, "Eat me."
Well,
thought Alice,
if it makes me larger, I can get the key. And if it makes me smaller, I can creep under the door.
So she quickly ate all the cake. The Pool of Tears. Right away, she started opening up.
Curiouser and curiouser,
cried Alice, who was still too young to speak perfect English.
Goodbye, feet,
she called as she rose higher and higher, finally striking her head on the roof of the hall. Now she could never go through the little door, and started to cry again. This time she shed so many tears that they made a large pool around her. After a time she heard the sound of little feet. It was the white rabbit. and he was dressed very elegantly, including white gloves and a fan. He was still muttering,
I'm late! Oh, my fur and whiskers, I'm late!
Alice spoke, but her voice frightened him so much that he dropped his gloves and fan and dashed away. It was very hot, so Alice began fanning herself. Immediately, she started shrinking again, very rapidly. She realized that the fan was the reason, so she dropped it just before melting away. Once more, she was the right size for the little door, but again, the key was still on the table. A caucus race. Just then her foot slipped and splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. It was the pool of tears she had wept when she was 9 feet tall.
How queer it would be to drown in one's own tears,
she thought as she paddled about. A small mouse was swimming in the water too, and other furry animals with funny names like Dodo and Lori soon joined them. At last they all swam to shore, dripping wet and uncomfortable. The Dodo then suggested having a caucus race. Alice asked what that was, and the Dodo said,
The best way to explain it is to do it.
The Dodo marked a big circle, and everyone placed somewhere on the circle, here and there. They all ran when they liked and stopped when they liked, so it wasn't easy to know when the race was over. After running half an hour, they were all quite dry, and the Dodo called,
The race is over.
They all crowded round and asked, But who won? The Dodo sat for a long time, thinking, and then he said,
Everybody won.
But who is to give the prizes? They all asked.
Why, she is, of course,
said the Dodo, pointing at Alice. The whole party crowded around her, calling,
Prizes! Prizes!
Poor Alice didn't know what to do until she remembered the box of candy in her pocket. Fortunately, the salt water hadn't gotten into it. There was exactly 1 piece for each runner.
But now she must have a prize, you know,
said the mouse.
Of course,
said the Dodo. Then he asked Alice,
What else do you have in your pocket?
Only a thimble, said Alice sadly.
Hand it over,
said the Dodo. He then gave a speech and presented the thimble back to her. All the birds and animals cheered. Alice wanted to laugh because it was all so silly, but she bowed and took the thimble. Advice from a caterpillar. Soon, Alice was alone again, and after wandering down the hall, she found herself in some woods. She was still very small, so when she saw a big mushroom, she had to stand on tiptoe to peep over the edge. Sitting on top was a large blue caterpillar, smoking a hookah, or water pipe. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other in silence until the caterpillar stopped smoking and said sleepily,
Who are you? I really don't know, sir. I know who I was this morning, but I've changed several times since then. Explain yourself,
demanded the caterpillar.
I can't,
because I'm not myself, you see," said Alice. I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't explain, because I don't understand myself. Being so many different sizes in one day is confusing," said Alice.
"It isn't,"
said the caterpillar.
"Well, you'll be a chrysalis someday, and then you'll be a butterfly. I think you'll feel a little queer then, won't you?"
asked Alice.
"Not a bit,"
said the caterpillar.
"Well, maybe your feelings are different,"
said Alice.
"I know it would feel queer to me." "Who are you?"
asked the caterpillar. This brought the conversation right back to the beginning, and Alice was feeling a little irritated.
"I think you ought to tell me who you are first,"
said Alice. "Why?" said the caterpillar. Alice thought the caterpillar was very unpleasant, so she started to walk away.
"Come back,"
called the caterpillar.
"I have something important to say."
Alice came back, and the caterpillar said,
"Keep your temper."
"Is that all?" demanded Alice. The caterpillar puffed on his hookah for a few minutes, and since Alice had nothing to do, she waited to hear what he would say. At last he asked,
"What size do you want to be?" "I don't care what size,"
Alice replied quickly.
"I just don't like changing so often, you know."
"I don't know," said the caterpillar. "Are you content now?"
"Well, I'd like to be a little larger, sir. 3 inches is a terrible height to be."
"It's a very good height," said the caterpillar angrily. He was exactly 3 inches tall. Then he took the hookah out of his mouth and yawned. He got down off the mushroom and crawled away, remarking,
"One side will make you grow taller, and one side will make you grow smaller." "One side of what?"
asked Alice.
"Of the mushroom,"
called back the caterpillar, and then he was gone. Alice was puzzled because the mushroom was completely round, but she stretched her arms around it and broke off a piece from each side. She nibbled a little of the right-hand bit and started shrinking fast. Quickly, she took a bite from her left-hand bit before she disappeared. She was suddenly alarmed when she looked down and could see no shoulders, only a long, long neck sticking out of green leaves far below. She was just wondering what had happened to her arms and hands when an angry pigeon started screaming at her.
"Snake! Snake! Get away from my nest!"
"I'm not a snake," said Alice indignantly. The pigeon and Alice had a big argument, Alice claiming she was only a little girl, and the pigeon insisting she was a snake. Finally, Alice twisted her neck, which, to tell the truth, was very much like a snake, and managed to get her mouth near her hand. She nibbled the pieces of mushroom, first one and then the other, until she was her own size once again. But not for long. She soon found herself near a little house about 4 feet high. The house was so small that whoever lived in it must be small too, and she didn't want to frighten them. She nibbled on the right-hand mushroom piece until she was down to 9 inches high. Just then, the door flew open and plates came flying out. From inside, she could hear much sneezing and howling. The Cheshire Cat. She tiptoed through the open door and found herself in a large kitchen which was filled with smoke. A cook was stirring soup in a huge pot, and an ugly duchess was sitting on a stool, holding a baby who was sneezing and howling. Alice and the duchess were sneezing too, because the cook kept shaking pepper into the pot. The air was filled with pepper. In a corner sat an enormous cat, grinning from ear to ear. Alice was astonished, and she said to the duchess,
"Excuse me, but why does your cat grin like that?"
"Because it's a Cheshire cat, of course,"
the duchess answered.
"I didn't know cats could grin,"
said Alice politely.
"Well, you don't know much."
Alice didn't like this rude remark at all. Just then the cook started throwing pots and pans at the duchess and the baby. Alice was shocked, but the duchess paid no attention and just started singing a kind of lullaby. At the end of each line, she gave the baby a shake or threw it in the air.
"Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy because he knows it teases."
The cook and baby joined in the chorus. Wow, wow, wow! At the end of the song, the duchess threw the baby at Alice and said,
"Here, you nurse it. I must go play croquet with the queen."
Alice had a hard time carrying the baby because it was a strange shape. Also, she told it to stop snorting and grunting, for that it wasn't nice at all. When the baby didn't stop, she looked closely at its face. Its eyes were too small for a baby, and its nose was more like a snout.
"Well," said Alice, "if you are going to turn into a pig, I will not nurse you any more."
She put it on the ground, and it trotted off into the woods.
"Oh well,"
sighed Alice.
"It would have been a very ugly child, but it's a rather handsome pig."
Just then she was happy to see the Cheshire Cat sitting on the branch of a tree. It was grinning, so Alice felt sure it was friendly in spite of its long, sharp claws and big teeth. She greeted the cat and asked,
"Which way should I go?"
"Where do you want to go?"
it asked.
"I don't really care, but I want to go somewhere," said Alice.
"In that case, if you walk long enough, you're sure to do that," said the cat.
"Who lives near here?"
asked Alice.
"The March Hare and the Mad Hatter. They're both mad."
"But I don't want to visit mad people," Alice said.
"You can't help it," said the cat, "because we're all mad. I'm mad and you're mad."
"Why do you say I'm mad?" demanded Alice.
"You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't be here."
"Oh,"
said Alice, and she thought about that very carefully.
"Are you going to play croquet with the queen today?" asked the cat.
"I would like to, but I haven't been invited,"
said Alice.
"You'll see me there,"
said the cat, and he disappeared. Alice stared at the branch, and the cat appeared again.
"What happened to the baby?" it asked.
"It turned into a pig,"
Alice said quietly. I thought it would, said the cat, and it vanished. It came back again, and Alice was getting dizzy. She asked it please not to appear and disappear so suddenly. All right, it said. This time, beginning with its tail, it slowly disappeared. Leaving only its grin, which remained for a long time. Alice had often seen a cat without a grin, but she had never seen a grin without a cat. A mad tea party. She had not gone much further when she saw the house of the March Hare. Its chimneys were shaped like rabbit's ears, and the roof was thatched with fur. Since the March Hare was mad, she nibbled on the left-hand mushroom and grew to 2 feet high. In front of the house, a long table was set with many teacups. Crowded together at one corner of the table were the March Hare, the Mad Hatter, and a dormouse who was asleep. "No room! No room!" they cried when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," declared Alice, and she sat in a large chair at the end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare politely. "I don't see any wine," she answered. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then that's not very nice of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very nice of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. The Hatter was staring at Alice, and he finally said, "Your hair needs cutting." "It's very rude to make personal remarks," said Alice. The Hatter looked surprised. Then he said suddenly, "Why is a crow like a desk?" "Oh, now we shall have some fun," thought Alice. She loved riddles and was sure she could guess the answer. While she was thinking, the Hatter took his watch from his pocket and started shaking it. "What day of the month is it?" he asked Alice. She thought for a moment and said, "The 4th. "2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wasn't good for a watch," he said angrily to the March Hare. "But it was the best butter," the March Hare whined. Alice looked at the watch with curiosity. "What a funny watch! Does it tell the day of the month and not the o'clock?" she asked. "Of course," said the Hatter. The Dormouse was asleep, so they poured hot tea on its nose. It opened its eyes wide and then went to sleep again. "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" asked the Hatter. "No, I give up. What's the answer?" "I have no idea," said the Hatter. Alice sighed. "What a waste of time to ask riddles with no answers." "I want a clean cup," said the Hatter, and they all moved one place. Alice ended up at the March Hare's seat, where he had spilled the milk all over his plate. "Do you want to hear the song I sang at the Queen of Hearts concert?" asked the Hatter. Before she could answer, he started. "Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder where you're at. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle." The Dormouse shook itself and began to sing in its sleep. "Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle," over and over again, until they pinched him to make him stop. "Do you know that song?" asked the Mad Hatter.
Well,
said Alice,
I don't think—
Then you shouldn't talk,
snapped the Hatter. Alice was tired of their rudeness, so she got up and walked off. When she looked back, the March Hare and the Mad Hatter were trying to put the sleeping Dormouse into the teapot.
That's the stupidest tea party I ever saw,
said Alice to herself. Just then she saw a tree with a door in it.
Everything is curious today,
she thought, but she went through, and once more she was in the long hall close to the glass table. This time she used the golden key to unlock the little door, and then she nibbled the mushroom, which she had kept in her pocket, until she was 1 foot tall. At last, she was in the beautiful garden with bright flowers and cool fountains. The Queen's Croquet Ground. Just inside the garden, there was a large rose tree, and 3 gardeners were busy painting the white flowers red.
Excuse me,
said Alice shyly,
but why are you painting those roses?
One of the gardeners, whose body was like the 2 of spades in a pack of cards, answered in a whisper.
Well, you see, miss, we made a mistake. The Queen wanted a red rose tree, and we planted a white one by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we'll all have our heads cut off.
At that moment, gardener number 5 of spades called out,
The Queen! The Queen!
And the 3 gardeners threw themselves flat on the ground. Alice wanted to see the Queen, and she turned around just in time to watch a big parade. First, there were 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Next came the 10 courtiers decorated with diamonds. And last were 10 royal children, laughing and dancing and covered with hearts. The guests were mostly kings and queens, but Alice also saw the White Rabbit, looking very nervous. Finally marched the King and Queen of Hearts. The parade stopped by Alice, and everyone looked at her. The Queen shouted in a fierce voice,
What's your name, child?
My name's Alice, Your Majesty,
said Alice very politely, but she was thinking to herself,
Why, they're nothing but a pack of cards. Why should I be afraid of them?
And who are these?
The Queen yelled at Alice, pointing to the 3 gardeners. Alice said bravely,
How should I know? It's none of my business.
The Queen turned red with anger and screamed,
Off with her head!
The King said timidly,
But she's only a child, my dear.
Then the Queen made the gardeners stand up. They were very frightened, but they tried to explain.
Never mind,
said the Queen, who was examining the roses.
I see what you've been doing. Off with their heads!
The parade moved on, leaving 3 soldiers behind to execute the gardeners, who ran to Alice for help.
Don't worry,
she told them,
you won't be beheaded.
And she put them into a flower pot. When the soldiers couldn't find them, they marched off to join the parade.
Are their heads off?
Shouted the Queen.
Their heads are gone, Your Majesty,
said the soldiers.
Good,
shouted the Queen again. Then she turned to Alice and asked,
"Can you play croquet, child?"
Yes,
shouted Alice.
"Come on, then,"
roared the Queen, and Alice joined the parade too.
"Get into your places,"
shouted the Queen in a voice like thunder. People began running in all directions, falling over each other. Alice was sure she had never seen such a curious croquet field in all her life. The ground was all bumpy with furrows and ridges. The balls were live hedgehogs, and the sticks were the necks of flamingos, while their heads were used to hit the ball. Soldiers bent over to make the arches for the ball to go through. Alice had a difficult time trying to hold her flamingo until she tucked it under her arm with its legs hanging down. Each time she got its neck straight and ready to hit the hedgehog, the flamingo would twist itself around and look up into her face with such a puzzled expression, Alice had to laugh. Then, when the flamingo's head was ready to hit, the hedgehog would unroll itself and crawl away. Also, the bent-over soldiers were always getting up and walking to another part of the field. Alice thought it was a very difficult game. The players didn't wait for turns, but all played at once. In a short time, the Queen went stamping about and shouting,
"Off with his head!"
or
"Off with her head!"
Alice was surprised there was anyone still alive. She was just thinking about how to escape when she saw something strange in the sky. It was a large grin.
oh good,
She said to herself.
it's the Cheshire Cat. Now I'll have somebody to talk to.
Next, the eyes appeared, but Alice waited for the ears before trying to speak to it. When there was the whole head, no more of it appeared. Alice started complaining right away.
I don't think they play fairly, and they quarrel so loudly I can't hear myself speak. They don't have any rules, and all the things are alive. Just look, and that arch I've got to go through. It's walking to the other side of the field. And I can't hit the Queen's hedgehog because it runs away whenever it sees mine coming.
How do you like the Queen, my dear? Said the Cheshire Cat in a low voice.
Not at all,
said Alice.
she's so... Ooh!
Because the Queen was right behind her.
She's so sure to win the game.
The Queen was very pleased and walked away.
Who are you talking to?
Asked the King, looking at the cat with curiosity.
It's my friend, the Cheshire Cat. May I introduce you?
Said Alice.
I don't like its looks,
Said the King.
but it may kiss my hand if it likes.
It doesn't like, remarked the cat.
Don't be rude, and don't look at me like that,
said the King, hiding behind Alice. He called the Queen, saying,
My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed.
"Off with its head!"
said the Queen without even looking at it. The King hurried away to find the executioner. When he returned, the King, the Queen, and the executioner had an argument. The executioner claimed he couldn't cut off a head when there was no body. The King argued,
Anything that has a head can be beheaded.
and the Queen shrieked,
"If something isn't done soon,
I'll have everybody executed.
While they were arguing, the cat's head slowly faded away until there was nothing left.
This is all nonsense,
said Alice loudly. The Queen was enraged and grew red and purple in the face.
Off with her head!
She shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Alice had been nibbling on her mushroom and had grown to her full size.
Who cares about you?
She scoffed.
You're nothing but an old pack of cards.
As soon as she said that, the whole pack attacked her, flying in her face and hair. She gave a little scream, half in fright and half in anger, and she tried to beat them off with her waving arms.
Alice! Alice! Wake up, little sister!
Alice opened her eyes and found herself lying on the grass with her head in her sister's lap. Mary was brushing away dry leaves that had blown into Alice's face and hair.
Oh, Mary,
said Alice excitedly.
I had the most curious dream.
And she told her sister all about her experiences down the rabbit's hole. Just as she finished, a white rabbit hopped through the long grass, and a frightened mouse splashed into a nearby pool. All the sounds of Wonderland were right there. The tinkling sheep bells could have been the tinkling of teacups at the Mad Hatter's party. The Queen's shrill voice was changed into the cries of a shepherd boy, and the sneezes and squeals of the Duchess and the baby pig were the many sounds coming from the barnyard animals. Someday, Alice would gather her own dear children around her and make their eyes shine with the strange stories of her wonderful adventures in Wonderland.